The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study is something that everybody needs to know about. It was done by Dr. Vince Felitti at Kaiser and Dr. Bob Onda at the CDC, and together they asked 17,500 adults.
So what do you think? What struck you about what Dr. Harris was saying?
All the extremely high percent jumps you get from, trauma in childhood. I know it's that extreme.
Yep. And think about the kids that you're working with. How many of the kids that you work with are smoking cigarettes? How many of the kids are experimenting with drugs? How many of the kids might be obese, might be depressed?
Eileen, AJ is adding to the chat box, so trying to communicate through there. And John Randall was struck by the statement about the bear and having to live that every day.
Yep. Yeah, remember last week we talked about how our hyperarousal level goes up and stays up? Well, that's because that's the family where dad comes home drunk, 4 nights a week. And the kid gets wired to be ready for that minute when he walks in the door. And his cortisol level, his adrenal levels, everything moves up and doesn't come back down. Yeah. Yeah. And then the thing that I think is really important is to understand how the developing brain is so inhibited because of these situations. And then we sort of approach the problem of a kid that's not doing well in school as kind of lazy or not willing to. But we don't recognize that that kid may be so preoccupied with how to manage what he's going home to that he can't quite let go of that in order to really take in new information. But I also think it's important for us to think about our own experiences. I think it's profound the way that this study was originally done in a kind of middle class Caucasian population. And had the same outcomes as in poorer neighborhoods, because we think about sort of our situations as somehow different, which is why I think it's important for us to do our own ACES kind of questionnaire and then think about sort of what has happened in our own lives. Because truly, if we can connect to this on a personal level or through people that we know, we're much more likely to be able to connect to the kids that we're working with and be able to keep your eye on for what that might be, how that might be presenting.
So Eileen, there was a couple more comments in the chat.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Yep. So John Forbes said the evidence seems awfully compelling and it's right there out in the open. AJ commented that I'm glad Dr. Harris was talking about the testing and then brought it out into the room and said there were problems with people in the room who experienced this type of issues. James said the ACES covers a very broad spectrum and can affect a good majority of us. And AJ agreed with John Forbes. So it's some good conversation.
Eileen, are you familiar with Bruce Lipton? He's a doctor that studies epigenetics.
Yes.
I thought it was very interesting because he talks about just how your thoughts, your brain causes your brain to release chemicals in your body that go through your blood and bathe your cells. And if they're good chemicals, of course, good things happen. If they're bad chemicals from trauma and things like that, you have the adverse health effects, which was very close comparison to what you were saying.
Yeah. We run a mother-child program here at Amos House for moms whose kids have been taken away because of their addiction and incarceration, and they're in the process of reunifying. And we have, out of 12 moms, 3 kids that have diabetes, that have asthma-related issues. And it's always been the case, no matter what the composition of moms in that program are, the kids, by the time they're reaching kind of latency age, they're getting onset diabetes, onset asthma. And we know it's because of their early childhood experiences and how their body kind of begins to start breaking down and creating illness. And this has, I think the long-term effects are really, I think that's really what's powerful. It is a public, she talks about it as a public health crisis in the same way that we had an AIDS crisis. And, I think what she's saying also is that if we all get on board with this and make it about a public health crisis, it also takes away the judgment for that family that might be struggling. If a family member can recognize that there's the need for supports to help them manage what might be overwhelming, ultimately we're looking at predicting kind of a better outcome for those kids. Any other comments before we move on? So I just want to break it down a little bit more. If you can go back to the PowerPoint. So we begin to see some of these issues already in adolescence. Think about the kids that you're working with. Depression, anxiety, I'm sure you're seeing that in some kids. Unintended pregnancies, unplanned pregnancies. I don't know if you're seeing kids in your schools that are who are teenagers and pregnant. We're not seeing as much, thank God, in terms of STDs and HIV. We've seen where there's been an increase in STDs, but HIV has definitely been in many ways managed through lots of education. We may not see cancer as a kid, but we're going to see we could see things like diabetes and asthma. Kids who are drinking, having unprotected sex, sort of the kids that we see that are putting holes, tattoos and piercings everywhere. All of those are signs that kids could be experiencing kind of a difficult home life and or neighborhood or community, that they're finding kind of outlets that are unhealthy and risky. And then you'll see those kids have less opportunity educationally. So I think this is really kind of where we start looking at how one thing builds on another. The other thing is the historical trauma. Remember, she said that it actually can change DNA. Often you'll see generations of trauma where we don't see that we can break the cycle. Historical trauma has a big impact if you look at sort of the African American community and how slavery continues to, and racism continues to affect how people do in terms of managing trauma and opportunity. We have to look at sort of both the local context as well as the broader context. I think I'm interested to see from all of you, because you're all in different communities where some of this might be really obvious, and in other communities where it might be more subtle. So, for folks that might be in East Greenwich or some of the other more wealthy communities, how do you see the kids showing up with signs that things may not be okay at home? What are you seeing in some of those kids?
I just see the obvious signs with the kids, but a lot of it is either like the parents, because of they don't want the stigma of maybe my son or daughter has that problem, or everyone has to go to Yale and be this Rhodes Scholar and be this professional. It's almost, but the kids, you see it every day, and the kids aren't afraid. Show. It's the parents. The parents,
So the kids are kind of being conditioned in a certain way of how they have to perform. And how does that impact their anxiety?
Oh, that just ramps it up even more.
Yeah, right. Right.
Everything else they have, and then you add on what I'm supposed to do. Really, what's going on?
Yeah, if you think about eating disorders, 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, eating disorders were primarily in white middle-class teenage girls. And we know that anorexia is a continuum of an anxiety disorder. And often those kids are having to be perfect and excel at everything. And the pressure just, they're feeling so overwhelmed and so out of control. So they're trying to control what they can, which is sort of what they take into their bodies. what we've seen over time is that the eating disorders have become more prevalent either also in communities of color, and it's about a class issue and expectation, family issues. So you might see that as sort of the way that a kid is showing up with adverse childhood experiences, sort of the pressure of having to be to do so well in all those areas. So actually, before we do this, let's go back to, I want to show you another video that I find incredibly powerful. It's a group of men in prison. And as you watch this video, I want you to listen to what the childhood experiences were that ended up creating kind of the path that they have taken, so that we can trace it back to early childhood experiences.
It's time now, everyone. We're gonna do the compassion trauma circle. Is everyone ready to face their past with compassion? Is that a yes? Yeah! While you were growing up, during your first 18 years of life.
So, what do you think? What did you hear? James? See it in your eyes. AJ really likes the video. Yeah, AJ, what's resonating for you? It's pretty powerful, isn't it? Surprised at the circle movement? Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just thinking about how these men, you know, many of them lifers, and recognizing that there is a commonality that they all experience, that much of what happened to them wasn't their fault. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And yes, very much back to their upbringing, but it's the trauma, it's the childhood experiences. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. That's right. Mm-hmm. Ashley's saying that it's generational and it's a public health crisis, right? Yeah. And we think about the kids today and how many kids we already see is heading down that road. Color doesn't matter. Yeah, it's trauma and what their parents experienced. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And when that elderly man who said at 76 it was the best day of his life, why do you think it was the best day of his life?
He had probably been holding that in for quite some time and let it out.
Say that again, Kevin. I'm sorry, I didn't.
He was probably holding those feelings in for so long and didn't ever share them with anyone or realize that he was so affected by it all.
Yeah, he was seen. He was connected. Somebody else shared his story. Yeah. Uh-huh.
I think he could release that self-blame.
Yeah, that's right.
What he's a product of.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm. And what? Yeah.
I mean, there's a program, it's called Chain Reaction, and they actually do this exercise. They call it Walk the Line.
Walk the line, yep.
In a high school gym, and I've seen it done in places like Barrington, and it is incredibly powerful, especially when faculty participate alongside the youth to see what baggage young people walk around with every day.
That's right. That's right. Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And why do you think that she's focusing so much on shame? Prison is shameful. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yep. Mm-hmm. But also, when you've experienced trauma as a child or trauma as an adolescent, think about a girl who gets raped at 15. She doesn't blame the guy that raped her. She internalizes it as she must have asked for it, right? She did something to make that happen. So when you've had a lot of trauma, you don't ever think about that somebody else was wrong. You think that you as a human being is wrong. One of those guys said, my mother didn't want me. So how do you think that makes you feel? Like you're wrong as a person. You don't belong. You don't have a right to live. So you internalize things that have happened to you. And the healing comes when you can begin to let go and recognize that we're all born as good human beings. We're not born violent. We're not born criminals. We're not born, sort of a hoe, as they'll call a teenager, and then the freedom comes to begin to finding some self-love. Because one of the things that I hear every single day in my work is people feeling that they're unlovable. Because after all, if somebody hurts me that's supposed to love me, then I must be unlovable, right? Why would they hurt me? So you internalize that belief about yourself. And then how do you provide self-care if you're a piece of trash, right? And, we see that in kids when they show up angry and hurt and scared. They believe that they're just not worth living, right? So part of the work is beginning to let them recognize that they were kids when things happened to them, and it wasn't their fault. The person who hurt them was wrong, that they're not wrong. And it takes a long time to let go of that sort of self-hatred that shows up in cutting and in other ways of hurting oneself. And that's where the healing has to start. All right, so what I want to do now is, Heidi, did everybody get the handout now? Do you think? Yeah, so I want you to kind of, we're going to put you into small groups, and just in the small group, I want you to very privately do your own ACES score. And I don't want you to share your score with each other unless you're comfortable, but I want you to sort of share what your score feels like for you and kind of what that means in terms of your current day life, okay? So anybody have kind of general reactions from your small group? This is, let me just start by saying, this is not easy work. It's not easy to have us kind of revisit our own childhoods. It's not easy for us to recognize that, how prevalent so much of this is in our world, and how we're all affected by it, whether it's directly affected or through vicarious trauma. And, I'm sure everybody on this call can relate to the way that experiencing other people's trauma also can impact us, and we can get sick, and we can get burnt out, and we can, develop stress and anxiety and heart disease and all of that just from spending a life of doing this work. So I think it's also important to recognize that.
Eileen, this is Kathy. I mentor a young man who's in foster care, and his ACE scores are off the chart. Without saying too much about his family history, his mother was in foster care, and so it's like this cycle of early trauma. Right. 5 of her children are in the system. She's not able to. What's the sort of I guess I'm thinking about how you break the cycle. Like what's the success rate of breaking that cycle? And what's the key here is what I'm thinking.
So I think that's a really good question, Kathy, and I think it's something that we're always trying to understand. I think the most important thing is to educate that kid about how his experiences have affected him, but don't have to define him. And that's really where the work is, to help make some space between what happened to you and who you are. And, teach people about the way that their body reacts to trauma, helping, we asked early on about, in last week's session, about, is there an adult in your life that sees you, that recognizes you? We're going to go into the 3 pillars again. We'll talk about that. The fact that he's willing and able to have a connection to you, because so much what happens for kids who have had a lot of trauma is that they have attachment disorder, so they can't connect with anybody. And that's when you really have to worry, a kid that is not able to connect emotionally to another human being. We know from science that, kids that are not held at birth or in their early infancy are going to die, basically. So that the fact that there's a caring adult in his life that he can be connected to, he can see himself outside of his family. I have a colleague who is working with a family who all 4 kids were sexually abused by different men in that household. And the 9-year-old boy that she's working with found his 13-year-old sister hanging in her bedroom, and she couldn't take it anymore. And he, this was 5 years ago, and now he's 14, and he's doing incredibly well. And the reason why he's doing well is that he had a caring adult that got him into treatment, that has worked with him over these years to help him identify what his strengths are, that helped him build connections, build areas of competency. The more we can help these kids get connected to places where they can excel and can have a sense of efficacy and accomplishment, that defines them differently. And, again, part of it could be resiliency. And again, we'll talk about resilience score. Like, I grew up in a very difficult household, and my next door neighbor had 3 sons, and both parents were alcoholic. One son became a police officer. The other 2 sons became heroin addicts, in the same, so we sort of have to think about, how do we become, for these kids, the person that's going to help them move away from the dysfunction and find functionality in different places in their lives. And that's what our work is. The school is often the safe place. They're developing a sense of their own personhood outside of their family unit. And that's really powerful. The more you can keep these kids in school and engaged through these difficult transitions in their lives, that's the way that kids can get through. It's really important that the whole concept of the trauma is something that happened to them, not who they are. We're going to talk a little bit more about kind of a model of healing-centered engagement that really moves beyond trauma-informed, that really helps kids begin to recognize how they can define a personality and an interest and kind of a sense of themselves outside of their trauma. So, this whole question about, can it be preventable? Here's some of the things that, Nadine talked about, kind of building community resources as the model that can make a difference in outcomes for families. So again, we have to look at the whole person. So we have to look at quality childcare. We have to look at community centers, and we have to look at nutrition. And, she talked about all those different pillars that can make a difference in helping families really thrive rather than just survive through what might be difficult. Early Head Start, the whole purpose of Head Start programs, even without it calling based on ACES, was really to give kids a chance to do better educationally by doing early intervention. The earlier the intervention, the better the outcome. We all know that. Unfortunately, in many ways, by the time the kids get to you, some of the damage may be already done. And so you're undoing the kind of the results of their trauma, but it's not too late. We talked about this last time, but again, part of the work in changing is back to being trauma informed. We talk about the 4 arms of trauma-informed care, realizing that the trauma has an impact, recognizing the signs and symptoms in the folks that you're working with, avoiding re-traumatization, and coming up with responses that are more trauma-informed and building positive relationships for kids. So 3 pillars of trauma. We talk about safety, connections, and emotional regulation. So it's really important to, and especially for, I think this particularly for the resource officers that are working with kids. If a kid has experienced a lot of trauma, if they've experienced child abuse in their home or neglect or kind of any kind of violence, you have to assume they're going to be adult wary. They have created, their brain has associated adults with pain, right? Because of their early experiences. If we see a kid acting out and we respond in a pain-based behavior, a kid throws a chair and we respond by, grabbing him and putting in handcuffs, we're responding to a pain-based behavior with a pain-based reaction. The work is to get under the pain. We talked about this last time. How do we help a kid say, come on now, you're throwing that chair because you're hurt, and you're hurt because, whatever, like, rather than just respond to kind of the primary reaction of the result of the pain. And you as adults, especially in your role, I don't know, do you guys wear uniforms when you're at work in the schools?
It all depends on the community.
Okay.
Some wear regular uniforms, some wear like a modified, like a just a dress shirt or a polo shirt, but some do wear a full.
Okay. Yeah. Some guys in the chat are saying yes. Yeah. So just think about that. If you're a kid who grew up in a home where police were called to the house and daddy was arrested and taken out of the house for hitting mom, and now this kid doesn't have enough food to eat because, and I'm going to an extreme example, that kid's association with the police officer might be one of fear, right? We don't want that to be, kind of the ongoing experience. So just notice how, and this is not a question about whether you should wear a uniform or not. This is just about, okay, so a soft uniform. Okay, great. I like that, a soft uniform. This is about just assuming or recognizing how your uniform may create kind of an adult wary response to a kid that has had trauma. So you can diffuse that right away by making a joke about the uniform, and, saying something like, don't hold it against me. I have to wear this dumb uniform. Somebody was wearing it. AJ said that he was wearing a soft uniform, but then was told to change back. Well, I think it'd be a good conversation to understand kind of do you have your gun on you when you go to work at the schools? Yes. Okay. So again, we're thinking about kids who have had a negative experience with, not because of what they did, but because of what they witnessed. And your job is to be a resource to help kids when they're in trouble so that they don't end up getting arrested and locked up, right? So I think by at least starting out with recognizing how the uniform can be a barrier to the kids that most need the connection to you. And the most important thing that I have learned is that if I give information to somebody that's not trusting me about why I'm doing what I'm doing, I immediately begin to establish some trust, that I respect you enough to tell you why I'm asking you these questions. It makes an enormous difference. So connections is a second pillar. So Kathy was talking about this young foster kid. So the quality of the relationship can be so much more effective than any treatment intervention model. They've done studies on what makes a difference in terms of somebody's getting better when they go to therapy. It's not the kind of therapist, the training the therapist has, the intervention they use. It's the connection that person has, the ability to create that rapport that says, I can trust you. The traumatic brain, again, from early childhood, associates adults with negative experiences. I think I spelled experiences wrong. Sorry. So the brain needs to be restructured to association in the brain from negative to positive association, right? So part of the work in connections is changing that pathway. An adult signals fear, signals distrust, to adult is somebody that is an exception to that, right? So Kathy might be the first exception to that kid. And so he's beginning to create a different association in his brain that says, okay, so maybe this person is different and I can trust that person and I can begin to feel some happiness with her. That's a different feeling for me. I can begin to feel secure. Kathy's job is to begin to help this boy recognize that it's not unique to Kathy that he can trust her. There's nothing incredibly special about Kathy. I don't mean that, really, but there are other people that he can begin to connect with and feel happiness with and feel security with, because not all people, not all adults are bad. His early experiences created that belief, but we can generalize that if I can begin to, trust Kathy, then maybe I can also trust my math teacher. Maybe she's really not against me. Or maybe I can trust AJ, the resource officer. Just because he wears that uniform doesn't mean he's a bad guy. He actually, is a cool dude and I can talk to him. But it has to start with changing that brain pathway. What's really exciting is that the orbital frontal cortex, which is the place where these formations happen, is very plastic. And it's possible for teenagers and even adults can learn new ways of thinking and believing. So the third pillar in our 3 pillars, remember, safety, connection, is helping people manage their emotions and their impulsivity. We talk a lot about fight, flight, or freeze, that emotional dysregulation and impulsive behavior that is so automatic that a second a kid gets scared, he's going to fight you back because it's always the tiger coming at him, not the kitten. Remember that, even though, you're not the tiger, you're perceived as the tiger. So the more you can help them learn to manage their emotions, they can begin to build up some protective factors for success. What we'll know all the time is that a kid who learns how to manage his emotions is going to be much more successful than a kid who is impulsive and can't manage his emotions, right? That's one of the best protection factors that we talk about. We talk about, protective factors that can lead to positive outcomes. We want to help kids label feelings. Part of the work is naming what's happening, naming the feeling that a kid has, talking not about the behavior, but what the kid is trying to tell you by their behavior. Mindfulness is a really important technique where you help kids ground in the moment. You might do something like, sit in a chair, feel your butt in the chair, count the chairs in the room, count to 10, stamp your feet, pinch yourself. One of the things that I always give folks when I'm working with them where they have a hard time staying in the present moment and getting hyper aroused and acting out is to give them a rubber band to wear around their wrist. So whenever they start feeling like they are getting anxious, have them snap the rubber band. It brings them back to the present. It helps them remember where they're at. They don't get lost in their past. Cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT skill building is really important. Helping everybody understand that everything starts with the feeling. We have a feeling that leads to a thought that leads to an action. I'm afraid. I think you're out to get me. I'm going to hit you before you hit me. If you can help people slow down and sometimes go back and rework, what was the feeling that provoked that thought? What was that thought? And then what was that action? If I can get you to name the feeling, then maybe the thought can change and then the action can change. These are all skills that can make a big difference. And you can do it in the moment with somebody. Somebody's walking through the hallway and, you know, they bump into you aggressively, and they then, you know, want to punch you because they blame it on you, right? So you just say then, right then, so what happened right here? What did you feel that made you hit me? In the moment, we can begin to correct behavior and develop this muscle around having a different response. Questions? Comments? Heidi, did you want to say something?
No, I was just going to ask, so are you looking for things more with mindfulness techniques?
I'm just in general wanting to see how.
No, I'm not with James.
Oh, with James.
What was he looking for?
Does everybody understand what mindfulness means? Okay. It's really about bringing people back to the present moment. When kids are pacing, anxious, what are some de-escalation mindfulness tips? Okay, great. So one of the things that when somebody's pacing and getting agitated, I do a lot of grounding, like literally having people sit in the chair, push their feet into the ground, push their hands, you know, just really like holding on to get them to kind of get grounded. I'll then do kind of a head to toe muscle, you know, relaxing, like squeezing your muscles and then letting go, squeezing your muscles and letting go. That can make a really big deal to helping folks. You know, one of my biggest jokes and I do it all the time and everybody laughs, I'll say, I'll go from the head to the toe and then I'll say, now we're going to squeeze everything as tight as you can. Imagine you have a nickel in your butt and just squeeze, and everybody laughs and they're immediately grounded because they come right back to the present moment. You know, that's really important. That rubber band helps ground folks. Kids that have a lot of kind of sensory issues, having them write or draw can be something that will bring them, you know, to kind of to the present moment. Just anything physical where you can get them to kind of reconnect with their bodies, but making them sit in a chair and putting their, you know, feel their butt in the chair, their feet on the ground is really, or standing up and just like feeling, you know, tensing everything in and then letting go. That can make a big difference too. And kids like that, like if they've got kind of ADHD, I don't know if you have them in schools, but weighted blankets are incredible. I have 2 ADD kids and I've wrapped them since they were babies in blankets. Those weighted blankets make a really big difference. I don't know if you have a quiet room in the schools where kids can go when they're getting overstimulated, but you know, giving them a weighted blanket can make an enormous difference in kind of helping contain.
Eileen, do the school nurses receive this training?
David, you're going to try to give me a lot of work.
Trying.
I think, or weighted vests. That's right, Ashley. Weighted vests work too. Yeah, they might be less embarrassed with the weighted vest than with the weighted blanket. Right? Yeah. You know, I don't know, David. I don't know if they have them. I think they should. They should have this training. I think, you know, a lot of folks do it on their own. Let's move on. What time is? Let's move on. Let's move on to resiliency. All right, back. Okay. All right. So resiliency matters more. Okay. So the heart of the matter, resiliency is that people can be very resilient in the face of many challenges. And we need to know about resiliency factors. And part of the work is to amplify folks' strengths, help them tap into those strengths and remind. So kind of, again, like if you're working with a kid that you know has had a lot of trauma, We want to think about how to talk to them about what their strengths are, what they're good at, what they care about, what they're interested in. It gives a fuller picture of who this kid is. Just like I keep thinking about the young woman that David talked about last week, about her father, I think, had 3 overdoses, and she just kept working through it, and then ultimately he died. But there was some strength in that kid that she was able to keep functioning, even though she was living with the fear of a father who had an opiate addiction, that she was always probably worried that he could die at any moment because of his multiple overdoses. It's the armoring that we kind of look at in kids and in the people that we're working with, that we want to help them build on. So if you think about the kids that you're working with, what are some ways that you can think about they're showing up with some of their strengths? Does anybody have somebody that you're working with that you've seen that you sort of are thinking about them in terms of what their strengths are, even though you know what they're going through? Kathy, you want to talk about that kid that you're working with that's in foster care?
Yeah, so his name is Jabril, but I think the fact that he has so many strengths and resilience, I think, given his life situation, the fact that he is able to bond with adults and peers. He does very well with peers. When we see him, his behavior is so respectful, and in some ways, it's almost he's very eager to please. I think he doesn't want to let people down. Mm-hmm. He shows up to school. He does well in school. He looks after his siblings, who are all in various other either foster care situations or challenging situations. He has a 16-year-old sister who suffers from depression, and he worries about her. Yeah. He turns up and he shows up, and I think one of his more resilient characteristics is his sense of humor. He's a very funny kid. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that helps him get through, but
absolutely. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, that actually is a great protective factor. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And his ability to engage people, like you said, part of it may look like it's this need to please, but that grew out of being, what I call a tracker. Like he had to figure out early on kind of how to survive. And knowing how to survive is being able to read people very carefully. And that is a strength that you see in a lot of these kids, that they can read you, they can pick immediately kind of who they can trust and who they can't. Sometimes they give up too quickly, but they usually have a very good intuitive sense. We talk about emotional intelligence. Daniel Goleman talked, his book on emotional intelligence. A lot of these kids may not have, sort of the best academic successes, but they are incredibly emotionally mature because they have high emotional intelligence that they developed early on as a way to survive where there wasn't a lot of emotional support for them.
So he has had very bad experiences with law enforcement. So at the age of 8, he was taken out of school several times in handcuffs. If you met him, you would find that hard to believe, but I think he would hide under desks with a pencil in his hand. So when I first was introduced to him as a mentor, one of the things they said to him is, look, if you have, you work well with law enforcement, can you introduce him to law enforcement in positive ways? So I've always very carefully done that. And the Warwick PD has been excellent. Like when we have public events and they're there, they'll bring him into the vehicle, show him the car. And it's very, on my part, very intentional. Have him connect with law enforcement in a positive way. And it's been great. Officers have been so good with him. So
Yeah, right. And that's part of that plasticity of that part of the brain where they can create new associations. They can think about police in a more positive way, as opposed to that little boy with that pencil that he was using to protect himself, right? Because the whole world was dangerous to him. And that's why he had to protect himself. But unfortunately, he looked like a dangerous kid. So when he needed to be surrounded with love, he, got a different response. So Terry is a 16-year-old female sophomore. She was quiet, generally cooperative and polite, loner, rarely speaks up in class. You never met her parents because they don't attend anything at school, so you don't really know what her home life is like. but recently she's begun to cut class. She missed assignments. She looks tired and disheveled. When her teacher approached her, she unexpectedly lashed out and pushed her out of the way before storming out. The teacher banged her head and doesn't want her back in the class before she apologizes. I want you to think about Terry, and in your small group, using the trauma-informed approach, the 3 pillars that we talked about, how do you start approaching Terry, and what questions do you have about her reactions? What do you want to understand? So what I want you to do is sort of break into small groups again. Let's just do 2 groups because there'll be more participation, and just begin to think about how to apply some of the things that we've been talking about in your role as a resource officer, who, you know, this teacher saying, until you get her to apologize, until you kind of get her to behave, she can't come back into my class. Okay.
You know, as Sean had pointed out, that, you know, having them, building the rapport with them first, and not even, you know, the apology is way in the background. And as you had brought up, let them kind of talk through what happened. And at some point, because most of us as human beings are really empathetic. And at some point, I think is if she keeps talking and keeps talking and keeps talking, she's going to have that aha moment and say, I shouldn't have done that. And I really should apologize. The important part of that, as I was saying, is if she can get to that point on her own and you give her a huge pat on the back and say, you know what, that's a really great thing that you came up with to that conclusion. Mm-hmm. And that is, we all know, you build on you know, good things that you do. When you do one thing good, you tend to build on that. And if somebody else is patting you on the back going, you know what, that's a great job thinking that through.
Yep.
She's going to continue to try to think these things through in the future.
That's really a really good point, Paul. Yeah. So you're drawing out her strength and emphasizing the strength rather than the negative behavior.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
But Sean started us down that road.
Yes, Sean definitely started us down the road. His 15 years experience definitely taught us a lot. Anybody else, and from the other group, want to sort of talk about kind of your approach?
Well, we kind of spoke, I mean, obviously about the approach, about everything about getting the rapport and speaking and stuff. But one thing that we did mention and we all agreed upon was, as a school resource officer, unless it's a criminal type matter, we don't really have a say. And obviously, if the instructor at this point's not letting her back in without just to get an apology, it doesn't sound like it led to a criminal type matter. So
right. And you also might be the one person that she trusts.
But also I wanted to say, or Al, if you wanted to say, like, they gave examples of ways that they've helped build relationships with young people after those incidents. Like they had to go down to their office and speak to them. And now, you know, they have a daily rapport with some of these young people.
That's right. Yeah.
Checking in with them, what's going on.
That's right.
Building that.
And now you might be that person. You're her person, her go-to person. Yeah.
That's kind of what we talked about.
Yeah. Is that what you talked about, Al? Yeah.
Yeah, I just gave like an example of a female student who kind of came to me through, you know, truancy, and then she got caught vaping, and then next thing you know, we were all talking about just kind of letting the kids vent, and I let her come into the office and talk, and next thing you know, it's becoming now 2 years, 3 years later, it's a daily occurrence where she's here whenever she's in school and gives me her recap of her day. And
that's fabulous.
Yeah, and we talked about that. We think that maybe it's just a comfort thing. She gets listened to her, and then she was comfortable, and then she realized there was other ways to lash out or to express herself. And now she's more involved with the school psychologist or whoever.
Right. So she doesn't have to act out to get positive attention.
Yep.
That shift has happened.
And And also the thing with that is you do that with one person, they tell somebody else, and you know, you got a couple other people who are kind of looking to come by just to get some stuff off their chest because you know you're going to listen. Maybe some of these kids aren't everybody's going to listen.
That's right. That's the most important gift you can give any kid is somebody that will listen to them. Yeah, without judgment. Yep. You know, it's interesting. I was thinking about it even as we were doing the small group, and it didn't occur to me until just now. Did anybody think about going and actually talking to the teacher about being trauma informed? Maybe understanding that demanding an apology may not be the best thing for this kid. It just occurred to me, like, that's also something that we could do. We could say to the teacher, if this is so out of character, maybe, you know, you understand that this kid is going through something, and maybe asking for an apology is going to further alienate her, rather than you approaching her with a concern that says, I'm really worried about you. This is unlike you. And, you know, how can I help? So we're advocates on the bigger scheme of things as well. All right. Any other thoughts before we move on? So what I want to do is have you kind of take a couple of, there's probably perception about people not wanting to speak to the police. However, it's really, go ahead, John. I want to see the rest of what you said. Truly, if being able to speak to you as police officers, as a trusting, that is a norm. I mean, you're the ultimate kind of symbol of authority in many ways. And if they can trust you and feel like you, even with your authority, can be somebody that they can talk to, then that translates into other people who are in authority positions that they may have had negative experiences with. So you're changing the dialogue for those kids on how they can perceive people in authority, right? Because that's often, especially during teenage years, where part of their developmental process is sort of kind of fighting against authority figures, right? As they try to form their own identity. The fact that they can connect with you and they can recognize that even with your authority, you're a real human being and you can talk with them and help them and care about them, that can generalize incredibly well with other authority figures in their lives, which is really a good point. Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I want to kind of quickly go through the resilient questionnaire. So I won't have you go back into small groups, but I'd like you to take 5 minutes on your own to answer those questions and see what your resiliency score is. And then we'll talk about how to use that with the kids that we're working with.
How would you say that we calculate numbers? Because I just had like definitely true, definitely not true.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. I didn't give you the second page of this. I think probably if you look at and see how many kind of definitely or probably true, it'll give you a good sense of what your protective factors were, because these are all about protective factors. Protective factors are the things that predict how well we do. And it's a way of looking at kids that might have had a high ACE score. Remember, we talked in the very beginning, like it doesn't have to be your family of origin that provides you with the supports. It could be somebody outside of your family. Like if I asked everybody on this call, who comes to mind outside of your immediate family that you connected to as a kid? Who would that be? That saw you, that knew you, that understood you?
Like a coach?
Was it your coach?
Yeah.
John? All right, great. So what did your coach see in you?
The fact that I could play and make him win, I guess. I don't know.
What sport, Chris?
Any sport.
Oh, you were one of those, huh?
Yeah, one of those. Yeah, just any kind of sport, I'll figure it out. No, just because you're around them and they know you every day. They're seeing you at practice. Even I was even the type of student I'd rather like hang out in that, sports world during the day instead of doing the schoolwork.
Yeah, right.
So talk.
Because that's where you excelled, right? So that's where you got your positive affirmation. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Other people. Chris, what about you? Was it the Catholic priest? That's just a joke. Who is your person? Did you have one, Chris?
That was just Chris that answered about the coaches.
No, that was Sean.
Oh, I thought that was Chris talking.
No, that was Sean, I think.
No, that was me. That was me.
Chris. Oh, sorry. I thought it was Sean. Okay. Sorry. Your mouth was moving, Sean. Sorry. Anybody else? David, what about you?
I would also say coaches. You know, you're there with them every day, if it's a high school thing but I think coaches played a big part, and teachers in school also.
AJ wants to know what the question was. I'm asking you to think about who the person was outside of your family that you saw as really getting you or seeing you, that you thought was a positive person in your life growing up.
I'd say for me, it was one of my first bosses I had. He was pretty amazing, and I could talk to him, and he was almost like a big brother around there. So that was really cool. That was more of my teenage years.
Okay. Yep. So generally speaking, AJ's had a lot of strong role models. Somebody said, and I can't remember who, it went too fast, that they were only allowed to be around family. So that world was pretty small then. So was your family supportive of you in that experience? Did they see you? Did they get you? That was AJ. Okay. All right. Okay.
And James had a teacher.
James had a teacher. Great. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I think a lot of, kind of, AJ's a third generation police officer. Oh, okay. So great. Okay. So generally speaking, this is sort of how you get, for kids that have had kind of higher ACE scores, to begin to pull out ways in which you're developing a list of protective factors for them. So for a kid who may have had a difficult home life but excelled in sports, you're going to want to know who that coach was, and you're going to want to understand and help that kid recognize that, wow, that coach really saved my life. Because when I was able to be at practice, I was able to forget about what was going at home. I felt good about myself. We often hear about like the term compartmentalizing. And in some ways, that's a defense that works really well for, growing up in difficult households, where you can have parts of your life that feel really good and other parts of your life that are problematic and difficult. And being able to get out of the house and go to those places where you almost feel like you're a different person because they see something in you that maybe the people in your household don't see in you. And then once somebody can recognize that, that can pull them out of a depression or a series of bad behaviors or bad choices, because they recognize that they're more than just what has happened to them. And, I think we have to recognize the ways in which we are those people for the kids that we're working with. If a kid can, sort of what Al was saying, that the kids can come in and sit in my office, that you don't know if you're that person for that kid. And never underestimate the power of that relationship, that you might be the only person in that kid's life that takes the 15 minutes to sit and talk with him. And that's an incredibly important thing, because 10 years from now, when that kid's in his 20s, he might say, I would have really dropped out of school if I didn't get to walk into that office every day, right? So I think that's really a powerful thing for us to recognize. And when a kid is struggling, that same kid might get into trouble, and you're going to remind him or her of what he or she is capable of, even in light of the trouble that they might be getting into. All right, let's move on. So this healing-centered engagement was kind of a way of looking at working with teenagers beyond just being trauma-informed, because sometimes trauma-informed tends to look at the person and see them trying to help them respond always about their trauma. And we have to think about the ability of teens that we're working with to be more than what happened to them. We want to look at what's right with you, right? You know, that question of what's right with you. Where have you done well? Where do you excel? We have to understand in this healing-centered engagement that we have to understand the systems of oppression that might have had an impact on a young person's ability to either succeed or not. And not think about the person as being the problem, but maybe the system in which he or she has had to survive. And that's particularly true for folks that are in communities of color, where the internalized oppression and racism and other kinds of injustice has really negatively impacted their ability to have the same kind of level of playing field that their white counterparts might have. And when you sort of move it away from the person as what's wrong with he or she, to understand that the system sort of hasn't necessarily given them the same opportunity, then it kind of can mobilize people into action rather than have it crush them. You know, I can give you, I told you in the first session that my kids are all kids of color. And I remember my son he went to classical high school, and he's a phenomenal swim team. He was on the swim team and won meets all the time, but in the classroom, he never opened his mouth. And he was very, very shy, very introverted. And he, when it was time to start thinking about college, his college counselor told him that he probably wasn't college material. And he really got very depressed and thought, well, why should I bother going to college? She doesn't think I can be successful in college. When I went in and talked to her, I said, what was the reason why you told my son that he wasn't college material? And she said, because he's too quiet, he doesn't talk up, and he just seems like, you know, it was all this stuff about her perception of him. And, you know, ultimately he did go to college, and he's, you know, done very well for himself, but the perception of him as being kind of, and he had some learning disabilities, so I think there was that, but just that sense of she saw him as kind of another, you know, brown kid, and didn't think that he had what it took to be successful, because of how unable he was to communicate verbally. She didn't see any of his strengths. So I think we have to look at the system that our kids are involved in and understand that whether because they're have too much privilege or not enough privilege, those systems can define our kids rather than letting us to see who they are underneath all of that.
Eileen.
Yep.
Do you provide this training to counselors also?
How did I know that was coming? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. You know, when people come in, I'll give you another example. When folks come into Amos House, and, you know, we're a treatment facility for folks that are homeless, most often when anybody goes into treatment to any facility, they take this whole long inventory of the number of treatment programs that you've been to and how many times that you've had to go back into treatment, basically asking, give me a detailed description of how many times you failed because you're coming back again. When somebody walks in our door, we say, tell me the longest time you've been able to stay in recovery, your sobriety. What's the longest? And what did you do during that time? And then we build that plan, that case plan around what they did when they were successful, rather than what they did when they failed. Because if we focus on what people did when they're wrong, there's no new information in that, right? We're not going to build competency out of your failures. We're going to build competency out of your successes. Part of the work in this healing-centered model is, so you're an amazing musician, even though you grew up in a household that was very abusive to you? How do you use your music to tell your story? Not, oh my God, you know, are a terribly poor kid that grew up in a terribly poor household. So here we're going to kind of talk about some mindfulness type of stuff. Somebody asked earlier about other skills to use. So we talked about mindfulness. Meditation is really a great skill. And I know that a lot of schools are doing more around yoga and meditation to help kids learn self-regulation. And they're doing it more in kind of early elementary schools and preschools. It's incredibly helpful. They have shown, they've done a lot of studies that show that for kids that have behavioral health issues and are acting out, teaching them mindfulness has made a major difference in their success in being able to stay in school. Part of teaching people about their emotions is using, you know, gauging scales like, you know, Likert scale, like, all right, so somebody walks into your office today and they're really, you know, kind of bouncing off the walls. You might say on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 you're feeling really awful and 1 you're great, where are you? And, you know, they might say a 5. So what you then say is, wow, you're a 5. That means that you're halfway there. And so then you think, so then the skill would be to say, so how do you move from a 5 to a 6? What could you do right now to improve where you're at just a little bit more? You don't say, how do I get to a 10? You say, how do I go from a 5 to a 6? Or another Likert scale would be kind of smiley faces. Pick out the smiley face on a scale of 1 to, you know, 5. 5 smiley faces, where 5 you're, you know, grinning ear to ear, and 1 you're, you know, your face is in a downward, you know, position. Just helping people identify where gives you some work on how to get to the next place. So those scales can be really helpful. Giving kids notebooks to draw. And, you know, a lot of the folks sit in our groups and they color all day long. It gives them something concrete to work on. It's a grounding technique. It helps calm people down. It gives them anything that's repetitious that you can do over and over and over again can really calm the mind. And then calm the body. Timeouts are really helpful. You know, teaching kids that when they're going to explode, they can count to 10 and take a walk around the block and then come back and try again. Like, those are really important, helping them recognize in their own bodies, in a body scan of where they're at right now, where they're holding tension and what their body is telling them. That can, you know, that you've seen the iceberg diagrams where are they on the tip of the iceberg, where they're going to, you know, or the volcano. Helping kids measure, because by measuring, it then gives them some sense of control. They can then figure out how to get to the next place. I always do a body scan, kind of where are you holding tension? What is that tension? What is your stomach telling you right now? What is that pain in your chest telling you? Why are your shoulders hunched? What would those shoulders tell me if they could put it into words? I'm so angry, I want to explode. So then let's talk about that anger. Why are you fist balled? What are you trying to tell me by your body? What is your body saying? If you can help folks put it into words, because often they don't know that they're even doing that. They don't know that they're ready to explode. You're looking at them and you see that they're a ticking time bomb, but they have no idea because they're not in touch with their bodies. Their bodies have split off from their minds. That's part of the dissociation that happens with trauma. So by helping them identify and put into words what their body is telling them begins the process of self-regulation. Positive self-talk. I know it sometimes seems corny, but, you know, tell them to look in the mirror and say, I am a good person. I am loving. I am kind. I am beautiful. I'm strong. That really can make a difference over time. You know, in the 12-step program, we talk about fake it till you make it. You know, sometimes giving folks these skills allows them to begin to imagine when things could get better. And then my favorite is the miracle question. Can we go back into full scale, full screen? All right, so I'm going to do the miracle question with you guys. So everybody close your eyes or soften your gaze if that feels safer. and think about a behavior, a habit, a problem in your life that you really, really, really want to change. Maybe you want to exercise more or eat better, drink less, whatever it is, something that you've been struggling or thinking about, but just can't quite get there. And imagine when you go to bed tonight that while you're sleeping, somehow, some way, a miracle happens. And when you wake up in the morning, you have accomplished your goal. What do you notice about you? What do you see when you look in the mirror? When you walk down the street, people just know that you've made it. They can just tell. What does it look like? How does it feel? And when you're ready, open your eyes and come back. So who wants to tell me what their miracle was? Work with me a little bit here. Come on. I need a brave soul. Hey, we know each other really well. We're family now. We're almost at the end of 6 hours.
Probably just, probably losing a little weight and making yourself a little, physically better.
Okay, so that was your miracle, Chris?
Yep.
Okay, can I work with you a little bit on this for a minute?
Sure, I'll take the hit for everyone.
Oh, you're the best. Congratulations. So, Chris, what did you feel when you woke up in the morning and you had committed to losing weight? What did you notice about yourself?
That I probably wasn't going to, probably not going to do it. I'm going to try, or maybe half try, but not really give myself either credit or the full all to do it.
Okay, so part of you thought, yeah, maybe I'll do this, but there was another part that was still not so sure.
Well, the intentions are always good.
The intentions are good. Yeah. So what would we, suppose you did lose weight. How much weight did you want to lose?
Probably 20, 25 pounds.
Okay. All right. So suppose you did. Suppose you woke up in the morning and the miracle had happened. What would we see? What would we notice? How would you feel?
Well, because I have done it.
Okay. So what did it feel like?
And put the way it just you wake up feeling better.
You feel better.
Enthusiastic. There's just so much more things, and then eventually you just get lazy and fat again. And
all right, hold up. Let's just stay with what it felt like to have lost the 25. And how did other people respond to you? What did they say? What did they notice?
Everyone would notice. Oh, I see you. You're losing weight, or they, I see out. Everyone I work with is like, get out of the locker room. Oh, you're heading over to because we're lucky enough where we have a full gym in our police station.
Nice.
We're like, we can go in there and work out. So people would be like, oh, you're working out today. And, like more or less the people noticing part.
Right. Great. Okay. So on a scale of 1 to 10, right now, thinking about starting to lose weight and working out again, where are you?
Yeah, he died. Yeah.
Tell them to leave you alone. You're in the middle of a really important moment in your life.
I'm a popular person. What can I say? I don't know. It's just
scale of 1 to 10.
It's probably like a 7.
All right. Okay. So you're more than halfway there.
Like I said, it's there, but it's not there. Some days it's there. That's why it's tough to.
Yeah.
The couple of cookies I just whacked down while this was going on, probably.
All right. Don't go, right. Look how quickly you go into your negative space. So let's think about that 7. That, you know what? I thought you were going to say a 3. I never thought you were going to say a 7. So good for you. So let me ask you this, Chris. How do you think, what's one thing, only one thing you can do today to get from a 7 to a 7.5? So you're closer to that goal.
Just better choices.
More specific. What choice?
I want something to eat. Well, I'm not going to have those cookies. I'll have a granola or something.
Okay. So
we definitely feel better,
You'd feel better, right? Yeah. Different kind of sugar, better. Yeah, right. Okay. So are you thinking that right now you can make a commitment for the rest of the day to not eat any more cookies?
I can easily do that.
All right. Okay.
Because I've already ate all the cookies I had. So I can guarantee I can't eat any more cookies because I don't have any more.
So there's that. So
it's straight and to the point. It really, I can't eat anymore.
Because they're not there. All right, good. Well, then maybe what you just learned is like, if the cookies are not there, you're not going to eat them. So just in general, like, do you see where I'm going with this? Okay. Yeah. So, so what happened to, like, let's talk a little bit about, if you can remember what it felt like when I took you through that miracle.
Yep.
What were you feeling?
Well, I was feeling pretty good about myself because, you know, I did well and people noticed.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. And what we do with the folks that you can use this exercise with kids that are so stuck and saying, you know, everything sucks. Nothing's good. I'm never going to make it, to break things down, because what we are, and kids who have had so much trauma that they think the world is just, that universal sense of the world is bad and nothing will ever be good for me. What we're doing is we're trying to open up the possibility of hope, that things can be better. You can find 1 minute in your life where you can begin to think, maybe there's a possibility that I can change the trajectory of my life, right? I mean, Chris, you've had the experience of knowing that feeling of when you had lost weight, you felt better and people noticed, and that felt really good. So when you can draw out that feeling, it actually gives you something to reach for again, because you've had the experience of that feeling. So part of the work that we're doing with kids is to help them remember, even if it was a glimmer of a time when they might have felt that spark, and then you build on that. Because if we only stay stuck in the tragedies, then that's all we see, right? We become what we see. If we can begin to kind of create the miracles, then we can begin to create possibility. And that's where movement can happen. Tragedies, trauma keeps us stuck, but the possibility of change is actually energizing. And sometimes when kids are really angry, it's the perfect time to be motivated to move, right? Because anger can be used both in a positive and a negative way. Anger can hurt, but anger can also motivate. You can get so sick and tired of being sick and tired, right? And then be motivated to begin to make a change. And sometimes you have to feel that, like, I can't do this one day more. And then somehow the push of energy can come through your anger at being tired of it. All right, so what are kind of last comments or last thoughts? I'm tired of hearing myself talk. What do you got for me? Questions or thoughts of how to use all of this? Suggestions?
I would echo a comment that Heidi made, that I think, you know, the officers here, their role is so important, more so now than ever for young people. These young people live in a pretty toxic world. And I think, you know, not only in that just the school resource officer role, but also being ambassadors for law enforcement at a pretty tough time for law enforcement. And I think, you know, James and I have had conversations about this. This is a good opportunity to discuss some of these issues. And
absolutely.
Humanizes their role. So, but yeah, I think in terms of substance prevention, our world, their role is critical. So
totally.
Eileen, I know you don't have enough time, but how would you use this to improve police community relations in today's world?
You know,
she's a miracle worker, David.
I think you use relationships, David. I mean, you know, when I first started this call 6 hours ago, and I saw a series of police officers that were not that ready yet to talk to me. I had to say, okay, let me begin to break it down and see each person and hear each person and be, and as we have spent the 6 hours together, I feel connected to many of you. Happy for the ones that I can see, sad that I don't know what AJ looks like. He'll have to come visit me because I'm really curious about how handsome he is. So, it's sort of about using those pillars, the safety, connectedness, emotional regulation. Those same pillars have to happen in our building a better rapport, breaking down the silos, breaking down those stereotypes, seeing people as real people. And we all find our common ground.
If I could recommend to the group, if you ever have the opportunity to go sit in an NA meeting, or I'm sure Eileen hosts a variety of meetings. It's not called NA, but she has a group that gets together daily, and I've sat in that group and just listened to their testimonies, and it really opens your eyes and your heart in a lot of different ways.
Yep. All right. Any last comments before we end? Any housekeeping besides getting that survey done for Heidi and Kathy?
No, well, unless Heidi has some, but I just wanted to thank everybody for the 6 hours of your time and for the work that you do, but also just to remind people, the regional coalitions are a resource for you. If there's other tools in addition to training that we can help you to do your job more effectively, I'm even going to look into buying AJ a laptop because I feel like, if you can't.
It's a really good idea.
Well, if you can't access a mental health training in your role, like that's not, that's what our role is to help you with tools. So if we can work with you on that and get the state to open up the coffers, we'll try to do that. So, yeah.
We'll do a GoFundMe page for AJ.
To get him out of the witness protection program.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Great.
Yeah, but so appreciated everything. And Eileen, this was just so enlightening and so interesting. And we so appreciate it. So you taking your time and all of you taking time out of your days and your busy lives to be part of this training. And again, if anyone thinks of anything else, throw it in the chat box. If you can think of any other trainings that we could offer, we would love to continue this relationship with all of you, and keep what we can to help you do your jobs better.
Great. All right. Thanks, everybody. It was really wonderful to meet all of you. And
thank you, Eileen.
Hopefully I only see you when I'm behaving. Take care. Bye-bye.